All right. So I'm Ashley. Nice to meet you. I made this piece that's out in the art area. I'm a coder. I'm a new media artist. I'm an Afrofuturistic artist. I'm an educator. And recently, I'm trying to own the definition of scientist. It's something I've been hoping to be for a really long time. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I'm really excited to kind of talk to you about some of the nuances and some of the interesting ways we can think about BioArt, which is a science-based art, and Afrofuturism as a unity that can help us imagine empowered futures for Black culture. So I wanted to start by just saying a little bit about why any of this matters. So this is a list of images. It's like not complete, obviously, but these are 5 images of technology we use on a regular basis and the source of where that technology was inspired from. So spoiler alert, most of the tech, 87%, according to my last batch of research, 87% of the technology that we use every day came from science fiction. So it wasn't like, yeah, it's dope, right? It wasn't just like some person sitting in an office coming up with like Siri or an iPad or the computer or the credit card or the cell phone. All of this stuff originated in fiction, in science fiction, was then put in a speculative way into the world via film or writing or graphic novel, and then became real through like a technologist who was inspired by that space. So I don't know if you guys knew that the cell phone came from Star Trek, or that William Gibson's Neuromancer came from, was the inspiration for the computer, or like any of these other spaces, but really fun space to do a little bit of research. This is a science fiction writer who you may recognize, one of my favorites, yay, Octavia Butler. Octavia Butler is a Black science fiction writer. She is like world renowned. If you're interested in looking at her work, I would start with Xenogenesis, because that's my favorite, but I'm biased. So she wrote an enormous collection of Afrofuturistic, though that terminology wasn't being used at the time, Black futuristic science fiction. So what was really interesting to me as a person who was trying to own the definition of scientists and playing with things in the lab is that years after she passed away, a collection of her journals was found, discovered that Octavia Butler was also a scientist. She actually spent a lot of time in her life playing with and experimenting with this bioculture called slime mold. Slime mold, hold on to this little bit of information till later on in the talk. Slime mold is a bioculture, a decomposer, a living organism that Octavia Butler studied to understand the ways in which society could function with equity and with diversity, and also looking towards how you could identify people as like they, or like multi-gendered, or fluid. And so a lot of those elements that show up in her work are actually inspired by this scientific experiment series that she did with slime mold. Just hold on to that for later on. So I want to talk about this loop, the idea that science informs science fiction, which informs technology, which informs society, which informs science, and this is like a feedback loop that goes on and on and on. And so it's really important, like just as a side note, that if you're Black or queer or female and you write science fiction, we need you, because you're literally dreaming up the future, because all of this future that we live in right now was imagined by somebody who was writing or producing fiction in the past, right? So like, if you're like sitting on this really cool story, we really need you to like figure out the future. Here's a little bit of proof as to how these things are like actually happening right now. The French army just announced that they're hiring science fiction writers to imagine future threats. So they literally are putting together a red team. This is from 3 weeks ago. They're putting together a red team that comes up with like imaginary ideas, like what are the kinds of threats that our environment could face, and they're like literally using those to invent technology. One thing that I think is at the center of this feedback loop is art. Art has always been a space of critical analysis for all of these things. And this brings me to some of the elements I'd really like to talk about: Afrofuturism, and also BioArt. So both of these spaces, I think, have a really interesting intersection for Black culture and the future. So just a few really quick examples of Afrofuturism if you've not really been, but thank you, Shaka, for contextualizing so much of this. I don't have to do half as much talking about this. This is Osborne Makaria. He makes these really beautiful illustrations based off photography that archive the story of an imaginary set of 4 boys who pretend to be part of the science club during school, but then at night go into these surveillance modes with their homemade technology to try and report on unjust issues. Ayo Okensiende, who was mentioned earlier, Salome Asega, who did a workshop yesterday, they have a collective called the Ayapa Repository who go and do workshops with people of color to imagine what future solutions might look like for some of the societal issues we're facing, and then they literally make those things as objects that exhibit later on, that function, which is really exciting. Some of the things that I'm thinking about right now, I'm imagining, I'm working on a project that's going to exhibit in November. It's called the Black Cloud. I'm imagining, like, what would a black cloud look like a digital cloud where we could upload all of our nuanced understandings of blackness so we don't have to hold that in our body or in our mind, and then access each other's cloud information and download things when we need them, re-upload them with contextualization. So that's an idea I'm looking at, and I'm building this physical cloud for a performance in November based on some of the aesthetics from Camille Zipporah. She's a really incredible Afrofuturistic artist. Annie Liu, she makes these beautiful BioArt perfumes based on the biometric biome of your loved one's body. Sebastian Kosioba, he is doing really interesting work where he holds ancestral data in plants. And I think this is really interesting. He mines, sequences human DNA and embeds them in plants, which has me thinking of an art piece that I'm hoping to work on before my thesis is due, ancestral seeds, where you can sequence your aunts, uncles, grandparents' DNA, plant a garden that holds that. Instead of selling your DNA to 23andMe, you can have access to these things and pass them on from generation to generation. This is a project of mine called Tree Tank. It's a box that basically mimics the live weather patterns of the country of origin of this plant. This one is from Jamaica, to trick the plant into thinking it's in its homeland so that you can harvest fruit from your origin country without all of the injustice that happens in between. And remembering slime mold from Octavia Butler, I'm gonna talk really fast now. So I'm going to take 30 seconds. Octavia Butler played with this slime mold. What's really interesting about slime mold is that it can solve puzzles. It understands how to equitably distribute nutrients. And it also is being tested to test efficiencies for US transit systems, all of these other really interesting things. I'm going to skip this one. Some art pieces that imitate the ways in which people migrate from one area to the other, also based on slime mold. Some solutions for how to fix Brexit issues from slime mold. And then one piece this is my last slide, one piece that Ayo, who I mentioned earlier, who Shaka also mentioned, he and I are working on right now, which is going to exhibit at GenSpace, a community BioArt lab in October on the 27th and the 20th. It's a slime tech lab, so this is an Afrofuturistic laboratory that works on research, but also art pieces that explores and teaches people about slime mold and its intersection with immigration, borders, diaspora. It's a physical thing. It's like my arm span and my height. So you can see this piece at GenSpace. The dates are over there, or the dates are down there, rather. And then if you want to come to these workshops, we're going to be talking about how BioArt informs the way in which we can design societal patterns so that we can have a much more just, equitable future, but mostly a future that empowers Black lives. And that's it. Thank you very much.